Web application development. Alright, so in this nugget we're going to look at server-side programming, and specifically we're going to look at ASP.NET. So ASP.NET's Microsoft's, it's really their programming language targeted for the web, and all ASP.NET is a set of classes and libraries that we can use to build programmable web pages. And really just think of it from a runtime perspective as ASP.NET is just the .NET framework installed on a web server. So what happens then is when a request comes into a web server that is for an .aspx page, the web server is going to know to call the ASP.NET runtime engine to process that request. So we'll take a good look at that process, how the web server works with ASP.NET to process a request. We'll also take a good look here at the page lifecycle. So when a request for a specific ASPX page does come in, how does that page get generated? And it's good to understand all of those stages and understand that process so you know best where to write code when building these web pages. All right, so we're going to take a big look here at ASP.NET and server-side programming. All right, let's take a look at the outline for this nugget. And we're going to start with an overview of web application development. Again, just want to talk about how requests are handled, how the web server passes control to something like ASP.NET so it can process the request and generate a response. We'll take a look at that page lifecycle, just an overview of all those different stages and what they are and how we can tap into them. And then we'll look at state management, how we can persist data across page requests. So once we get a handle on all the basics here for developing web pages on the server side, some of the big things here such as lifecycle and state management, we'll jump into Visual Studio Express Web Developer Edition and start building some pages here. We'll build a page, talk about how we can write code inside of each one of those areas in the lifecycle. We'll take a good look at how to do that. And then we'll look at state management and how we can do both client-side and server-side state management. We'll look at how we can build cookies on the client side and how we can manage session state management on the server. So let's start here with an overview of web application development. And we're going to start here with ASP.NET. Now, in a previous nugget, web page development, we kind of took just a brief look at the entire process here as far as the request and response model goes. So we saw that a client machine here would make a request through a browser. The request would go down to our web server, where the web server would then serve up the page and send it back as a response to the client. The client would then render in the browser. Well, we're going to kind of zoom in on this area because this is where ASP.NET sits, right inside of here. And what'll happen here is we have what makes this a web server is Internet Information Services in the Microsoft world. So this is just software that it runs as a service, so it's always running on the box, always ready to accept requests and then handle them. So if an HTTP request were to come through to IIS, the first thing IIS needs to do is figure out what IIS API library to process a request with. And you may have seen this if you've ever used IIS. You may have or heard people talk about it. They'll say ISAPI or IS API. It's just Internet Services API. It needs to figure out which library to load to handle the request. And it does this based on the file extension of the page. So there's ISAPI mappings that you can work with inside of Internet Information Services, which I'll show you when we get into our web server nugget. But basically what happens here is based on that file extension, and in ASP's case, it's going to be a .aspx file. What'll happen is it's going to say, okay, I need to load up the ASP.NET underscore ISAPI.dll. And what'll happen then is this DLL is going to send that request to the worker process, the ASP.NET worker process, whose responsibility is to simply take that request and compile the page. So this is where it's basically making the page, turning it into an assembly, something that the CLR understands, so it can pass it off to the CLR, and the CLR will then process and generate a page as a response. And then the next step is just going to reverse the process. The .NET CLR is going to pass the response up to the worker process, which is going to pass it up to the ISAPI DLL, which is going to format it in a packet, essentially, that it can pass back across the wire to the client machine, and then the browser will just render that response. Now let's take it a step further and give a little bit of meaning here to our requests and responses, because we've just kind of generically been speaking about requests and responses. Well, what are we requesting? That would be a web page, right? And when a request comes in for a page, the first thing that's going to do is ASP.NET is going to determine whether that page can be served up from the cache or if it needs to be compiled and it's a new request. So once that happens, we hit the start phase. So these are the stages I was speaking of, and anything in parentheses is an event that we can handle on the page, and this is how they occur. So really, technically, the first stage then is the start phase. And what this phase is, and it has with it, of course, is a pre-init phase. This phase is important because this is going to determine, ASP.NET is going to determine if it needs to generate a brand new page or if this is a postback. So postbacks are important. They're an important concept to understand because, again, the web world is stateless. And what that means is it's always just serving up pages and sending them off, not remembering anything about the page. So if it's a postback, this is where state's going to come into play because think about it, if there was no postback, the web server would only serve up how the page looked the first time it served it up every time. So if you're a user and you're on a page and you change a bunch of data, and you send the form back to send the page back to the web server by clicking on a button to save your changes or whatever, you're going to want that page to come back with how you left it and then some, right? Because we may make some programmatic changes on the page based on your input. So that's why postback is important, and that's where the start phase comes into play. It's just simply going to figure out here if the request is a postback or if it's a new request. Also here we have some page properties that are set. And the big one here is the request and the response object properties are filled up. And you're going to use those quite a bit in your web development days. And those are some of the common things I'll show you here when we get into our demo that you can do with things or response.write if you want to write data out to a web page. One of the big ones there, you can dynamically inject HTML into your page doing things like that. Some other things here other than response and the request object filling up so we can use them. The isPostback property is set so we know as programmers we can figure out if it's a postback. And then some other things are set in the stage. But again, we can hook into this stage through the pre-init event. So after the start phase and the pre-init event, we have the initialization phase, which has the init event. And this is where actually all the controls are initialized and made available to us. So this is a good spot to put control initialization code. So if you need to set any defaults or set any properties, it's a great place to do it. We also have the load event and the load stage. And this is where, if it's a postback, all the view state is applied. And we're going to talk about view state here in a minute. But basically, in a nutshell, view state is that all of that data that has changed from the user's perspective. So if it's a postback, we need to know that, and ASP.NET needs to know that, so it can restore the page from the initial state to the state that it was when the user submitted it back to the web server. And then again, any other things we can do with the page programmatically. So this is where it's an important phase here for view state because this is where all the updated data gets applied to the base page. Next here we have the pre-rendering phase, and we have a pre-render event we can hook into. And really this is just our last chance to modify anything on the page before it gets sent to render, and the output is then sent back to the client, so it's rendered in the browser, because that's what the render phase is. It's just sending the response back to the client so it can render the output into the browser here. No event hooked into that because it's an action, and really it's actually going to render every control on the page's content is going to get rendered out into the page. Alright, so that's all there is to that. And finally here on the server we have the unload event that we can hook into. So when the page has been sent back as a response here, it's just going to clean up. So we can clean up any of our objects left on the server, like connections to databases and such. Other than that, the response and the request object will get cleared out. And that's really so the web server can clean up after itself and release that memory back to ASP.NET can release that memory back to Internet Information Services, because we all know memory is important on the web server, and the more of it has, the better everything will be. So that's it. That's really the page lifecycle, and we'll take a good look at this when we get into a demo. I'll show you a lot of these events that we can hook into, and we'll just kind of prove that this is the order that they fire in by setting up some output in each one of them, and we'll see it in the page. All right. Next here we have state management, and just think of state as data, and think of a shopping cart. And this is why state is important. If you go to your favorite website, say cbcnuggets.com or Amazon or any site that has a shopping cart, and you put something in a shopping cart, you close out of your browser, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning, you go back to your favorite site, and you expect your shopping cart to be there full of items, right? Well, that's part of state management, and it could be as simple as remembering your username, or it could be as complex as a shopping cart. But state is important because we need a way to persist this data across sessions, and that's exactly what it'll do for us. And we've got a couple of ways to do it on both the client side and the server side. On the client side, we have cookies. And cookies is a good option for doing shopping carts, because you could be storing a fair amount of data, and storing all that data across all your users across the planet on one server, could get a little hairy. So it's probably a good idea to distribute that storage and use the user's computer for that. So that's a popular one for cookies, things like usernames, or remembering who you are, shopping carts, preferences, things of that nature, all good for cookies. Query strings is really just embedding the data inside of a URL. So if a URL comes in with data appended onto it, we would parse that data out of the query strings, make decisions on it, and then set up our web page based on that. So I'll give you some examples of these here when we get into our demo. We also have hidden fields, and this was popular back in the days of classic ASP, where we could use just hidden fields to store our information. And then view state really comes into play when you talk about postbacks, because when a page comes back to the server, the view state is going to contain all that changed data and all of the controls. So a lot of the properties in a control, their original values and their current values, so if the original value changed, it'll become the current value, will be stored in the view state, so the server can reconstruct the page based on the view state. And this is a very popular way to do it, because it basically makes hidden fields of classic ASP, where we had to do all of that manually, automatic in ASP.NET. Now, server-side state really refers to two things: session state and application state. And session state is really alive for the length of the user's visit to our web application. And it tracks this using just a unique identifier. So anytime a page is requested, it's going to store that unique identifier and pass it back to the user. So when the user sends it back to the server, the server knows what page it was, and it has a session state that's stored on the server. And all session state is a bunch of key value pairs, key and then data. So maybe we have a key being name, and then our data being the actual name of the user. So the key would be the name, and the value would be the actual name of the user. So that's what I mean by key value pair. And you get a lot of that in programming, just key value. It's kind of like property equals value. Think of it like that. And that's all really session state is. And I'll show you how we can use session state to store information from a user and then reuse it across page requests. So session state, alive for the length of the session and only available to that user session. Application state, think of it as global data throughout the entire web application. All users that are currently on the system within your web application, we can access that data from any user. All right, so why don't we head over to the Nugget Lab and take a look at how all this stuff works. Specifically here, we're going to take a good look here at how to work with the page lifecycle and tap into a lot of these events. And then we'll look at state management. I'll give you some good examples here on client-side state management, show you how to use cookies and query strings, take a brief look here at view state, and then we'll take a look here at server-side session state. And I'll show you how you can use session state to manage something like a username across multiple pages. All right, so let's minimize whiteboard, head over to Nugget Lab, and when we get over here, we're just going to hit start and head up to Microsoft Visual Web Developer 2010 Express. All right, so let's add another new website in here. We'll click the new website link, which will open up our templates. And we're going to, once again here, just do an ASP.NET empty website. We'll add an ASPX page and start working with it. I will show you this ASP.NET website template. This comes with some design patterns pre-built and with pages pre-built. Gives us kind of a welcome page, an about page, a login page. So it's more of an advanced template because it has, like I said, a design pattern, something called MVC, the Model View Controller pattern, built into it. And I'll give you a tour of it here at the end of this nugget, but I do want to point out that it is an advanced concept, and I also want to point out that it's an awesome advanced concept, and it'll save you a lot of time when building web pages, because you can reuse a lot of content and do things like master pages and such. So definitely get familiar with MVC. It's what a lot of development shops use these days with current technology and websites, building websites and web apps. So look into it again. I'll give you a tour here at the end of this nugget, but for now, let's just stick with the empty website, and I'm going to go ahead and just give this the name. Let's call this 14. Oop, that's not 14. 14 web app _ development. All right, we'll hit OK. And let's just say create a new website in the existing location. I think I already had this exist before, so we're just going to overwrite everything. There we go. And now we have a nice empty template to work with. All right, so let's right-click on our website and choose Add New Item. And we're going to get an ASP page in here. So before on our web page nugget, what we did is we added just a static HTML file, which is down here somewhere. See, here's our HTML page. Now we're going to add a web form. This is an ASPX page, an ASP.NET page. We'll leave the default name here called default and click add. So we get our page in here, and you can see it looks very similar to our HTML page, except that we have these processing instructions up top. And what this does is this basically tells it that it's an ASP page because it tells us what language it supports, C#. Auto event wire up. This is where we're talking about our events and our phases. By doing this, we don't have to write manual event handlers. We don't have to write them ourselves. They're automatically hooked up, and I'll show you what that means here when we get into our code window. Next here we have our code file, which is default.aspx.cs. In fact, if you expand our page, this is our code file, so our code behind file, where we're going to write the code for this page in the event handlers for the page. And then finally here, just inherits default. This is going to be the class name. So as I mentioned here, this is going to get compiled into assembly, this class. So this whole page is going to get compiled into assembly so the CLR can process it. And that's exactly what this is. In fact, if we open default.aspx.cs, you'll see this is a public partial class underscore default. So that's how these pages, this page gets connected to the actual front end here, the web page. And you can see just by going into the code behind, page load was automatically generated for us. And in fact, if we just paste in some code here, I'm going to go ahead and right click on this, choose copy, and then let's paste it in here. And sometimes it doesn't like the old copy here through our remote desktop. So I'm going to hit copy twice. Sometimes that does it here. How about copy, copy. Hey, there we go. So this time let's do pre-init, and let's just paste some more in here. How about regular old init, and that's good. We'll just work with those three for now. But you can see we've got in our page lifecycle, we've handled 3 events here, and we didn't have to do any hooking up. This is just going to automatically be hooked up because we have this auto event wire up equals true. So makes it a little bit easier on us. And now we can just start writing code in here. And in fact, let's just write the same code for each one of these. We're going to use the response object, do a response.write, and let's just write this was generated from page underscore load, and then we'll inject some HTML in here too so we can get a new line. And we'll do something like that. Alright, and then I'm just going to copy this code, paste it down here, and this time it's going to be from pre-init. And let's go down into our init and change this to init. So what we should see here is when the phase is hit in the life cycle, it should output it to the page. So we should get it in the order that these happen. Alright, so it should be pre-init, init, and load. So if we save this, right click, view it in the browser. There it is, pre-init, init, and load. Now another cool thing you can do, close out of our browser here and go back into our project. Let's go to our page here. Something that's kind of neat is you can actually inject code right into your markup here. So just like the page directive and processing instructions at the top is doing up here, we can do that too. So if we do an open bracket, %, it's going to finish the rest of it for us. And now we can start typing in code. We have to put an equal sign, and we can do server.machineName.toString. We're just going to do like this. This page was generated from this server at this time, so on and so on. So let's just do that. Let's do page generated from server, and we'll bold the server here, so we'll actually surround our code with some HTML. All right, it was generated from this server, and let's just make a new line here on. Let's do some more bold, and let's make another one here. Open bracket, %, it'll finish the rest for us, equals datetime.now.toString, and then we'll just put a period after all of it, like so. And let's just put some line breaks in here too, so we make sure this will be our footer, so to speak. So we've got some code injected into our markup here. Let's save this. Right click on our page, view it in the browser, and now we should check it out. So you can see this code was ran after a page load event. So all these events kicked off, and then the code inside of the page ran as well, and is generated on our DevNugget server. And this is the time that it was generated on the server. Pretty cool, right? Alright, let's move into state management here. And we're going to start with server-side state management. Since we're already in our ASP page and we're kind of working with ASP code here, let's just stick with it. In fact, let's give this page a title here called Server-Side Programming. Alright, and Let's liven up this page a little bit. The first thing I want to do here, let's just add another line break so we leave our page events alone here. Those will still output. And what we're going to do with our state management is take a user's name and their color preference, and we're going to remember it. So that way, as they're traversing through the pages in our site, we know who they are, and they don't have to keep entering their name or their color scheme. It'll follow them as long as they stay inside of the session. So if we want to get a control onto our page, we can just start typing a open bracket ASP, and you can see it'll list all the controls in here that we can work with. You can also use the toolbox here and just double click on one, and it'll type in pretty much type in everything about the label that we'll need, all the mandatory fields, things like an ID, a renat equals server, and you're going to see that every now and then on here. And what that just basically means is anything inside of here needs to be run on the server. Like an ASP label is a perfect example. In fact, all the ASP controls are going to have a renat server on there because they need to be processed on the server. All right, so here's a label. Let me just change the name here to LBL username. Renat server, the text is going to say username, like so. And then also here we don't need the closing tag, so we can just do something like this. Put the closing here, all in one tag, like so. Alright, and for the text box here, let's do something similar, only we'll type this one, ASP text box, and now we can kind of provide our own information as we go here. So let's just call this TB username. You need to put the runat server on here, like so. And that should be good. And we'll just do another break here. And then I won't make you watch me type the rest of it, so I'm just going to paste in the rest of the code. Oh, not that code. That's the right code. There we go. So what we did here is just add another label called color preference, and then a drop-down list full of all the color preferences that the user can choose from. So we're going to have them enter their name, choose a color preference, and then click on the submit button. And you can see here's what a button looks like. We have an on-click event that we're going to tie this to. So that means we need to go into the code behind and make an on-click event. So let's do that. Let's just go down here and just do a quick protected void btn submit underscore click. This is going to be an object here of sender and event args of e, open close, and we're good. So we've got nothing in here right now, but now we can see what the page looks like. So if we right click on the page and view it in the browser, say yes to the changes, we should get a page up here looking like this. So now the user could enter their name, we could pick the favorite color here, hit submit, and nothing happens. So not yet anyway. So that's our job now, is to hook up, put some code in that submit button so we can store this information in session data, session state, and then we'll make a new page where we'll use that data. So let's go into the code behind again for our default.aspx.cs code window here, and let's just put some code in our submit button to store the session data. And ready, you're going to love how easy this is. It's so simple. We just do a session. Here's our session object dot add, and inside of here, here's our key value pair here, right? So what we need to do is a string to identify it, and then a value to store it as. So what we want to do here is just first, let's just give the key username. This way, when we come to read it out from another page, this is how we're going to identify it and pull it out. So there's our username. What are we going to store? Well, the name of the text box on our web form, TB username and text, and that's going to be the property. And then we're just going to do the same thing here for our color preference. Well, let's just call this color pref, and the name of that control was DDL color pref, just like so, and get the text out of that. Oh, maybe that wasn't it. What do we name that? Let's see here. DDL colors dot text. There we go. And that's it. So we're creating two session variables that are going to be available to us from other pages here, one called username, one called color pref, with the values coming right out of the text boxes. So when the user clicks on the submit button, we're going to store those inside a session state so we can use them. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually redirect them when they hit that submit page to another page so we can use that data. So before we write that code, let's get this page in here. And I actually already have this page pre-developed here. So what we're going to do is just right-click, choose Add Existing Item, and I have a user welcome.aspx page here. So we'll just right-click, add that in, and here we go. And here's what it looks like. Just simply have a username label, a color label, and then we have a clear, because I'll show you how we can clear the session state as well. And then in the code behind is where we're going to read that data. So what I'm doing here is saying if the session variable username. This is how we access it here. Just session open bracket name of the variable that we're going to pull out of the session state does not equal null. So if it does not equal null, meaning there's data in it, then we're just going to fill into the label on this page string.def format, hey there, followed by the username. And then we're going to put in the label, the actual text is going to be your color preference is, followed by the color pref variable stored in session state. And then we're also going to do something a little cool here. We're going to take the back color of that label, and based on their color preference, we're going to do a system.drawing.color.fromName. So whatever, if it's green, then it's going to take the green from the name and extract the actual color out of it and make that the background color label. So that's kind of neat. Now, if the session is null for some reason, if someone's trying to access this page directly, it's just going to redirect them back to the default.aspx page. And then the clear button is going to do a session.clear. This will automatically clear out all the variables in the current session state. So you can also clear out specific ones. You can do a .remove and then pass in the actual name of it if you only want to work with one, or remove a single item. We're just going to remove them all here and then also redirect them back to the main page. So the only thing left to do here is back on our main default page here is just redirect them after they hit the submit button over to our user welcome. So if we just do a response.redirect and then pass in user welcome.aspx, that's it. Let's see if this works. I'm going to right click on default.aspx, view it in the browser, and let's just give a username here of Billy Bob, and favorite color being purple. Hit submit, and look at that. Hey there, Billy Bob, your color preference is purple. So by doing this, we were able to access our session variables on another page. Because if we do this, if we close out of the browser and now go into the browser, and let's just go directly to our user-welcome.aspx page. User-welcome.aspx, hit enter. See that? It came right back to this page because there's no username. So kind of neat there that we can do this because now we can access all this data across multiple pages. Pretty neat. If we clear session state, it's going to redirect us back, and then we can do it all over again. All right, let's take a look at client-side state management. And we're still going to accomplish this through server-side programming. It's just client-side state management is that we're putting this data on the client. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something else interesting here. Let's add our old web page development nugget from our previous nugget here, a project from our previous nugget, into this existing solution here. So I'm going to click on File, head over to Add, Existing Website, and we're going to add our project from a previous nugget, number 13, web page development. I'm just going to hit Open on this. And in here, remember we had this HTML page in here with our JavaScript and our cascading style sheets. Basically what I did here is I took this HTML page and converted it to an ASPX page. So you have both in here. We have a default.htm and then a default.aspx. And you can see this is the same exact page. The only difference is that it's a .aspx page because it has our processing instruction that essentially turns this into an ASP page and a code behind file. So it's kind of cool, right? Because in the real world, this is what you'll do. You'll do both. You'll have client-side, scripting languages with server-side programming on a page. So what we're going to do with this page is just put some cookies on it, and we're also going to work with query strings. So let me show you here. I actually already have the code pre-written in here. And the first thing I want to do is just focus on the query string. In fact, what I can do here is just get rid of this cookie stuff. In fact, what I'll do is I'll comment it out. So don't pay attention to any of the commented code yet because that's all cookie stuff. We're just going to pay attention to the query string. So a query string is when data is appended onto the URL. And when that URL gets passed into the page, we can take that extra information, parse it, and work with it. And we're going to do that through the request object dot query string. So this object just basically gives us everything after the question mark in a URL. So what we're going to do here, and it's just a bunch of name value pairs, just like session state, it's name value separated, by an identifier here, which I'll show you in a second. So that's all we're going to do is just analyze a query string for a name key, and if it basically equals null or does not equal null in this case, we're going to say welcome back, and we're just going to extract the value out of that. Otherwise, if it is null, we're just going to ignore it entirely. So just to show you here, if we right-click and choose View this in the browser, save it. Right now, it's just going to be, just like our old page. Look exactly like our old page We don't get any message at all. But if we go up to the URL here and add a name parameter equals, and we'll just do Billy Bob again, and hit enter, see that? Welcome back, Billy Bob, because this was parsed. Everything after the question mark here was parsed. And we can take this another step further, and if you have multiple values, you can separate them with an ampersand. So we could do color pref equals purple and hit enter, and it's not going to do anything because we didn't handle that, but that definitely came in the query string object as its own key value pair. So we could trap for that in here as well and extract color pref out of here if we wanted to use that. Alright, how about cookies? And we're going to use cookies in conjunction with our query string because we're going to take that query string data and store it as a cookie on the user's machine. So let's uncomment our code here. And all you need to do to create cookies is pretty easy. You have to use the cookie object here. So HTTP cookie object, we're going to name it cookie, equals a new HTTP cookie. We're going to give this cookie a name called name. And the value we're going to pass in is reading from the query string. So we're going to read from that the name out of the query string. And what we're going to do then is set an expiration on the cookie. So you can set it when a cookie expires. We're going to say add a minute to datetime.now. So this cookie is only going to be valid for a minute. So as long as we're within a minute, we're going to store that welcome back basically based on a cookie here. And then we just do a response.cookies.add, add it into the response object, and that'll write it to the response stream and create a cookie on the user's machine. So the result here is we should first get a couple of welcome messages the first time we type in a query string. Then subsequent visits within a minute, if we don't use the query string, we should only get the cookie message. So let's try this out. Let's right-click on default.axps, view it in the browser, say yes, and right off the bat here, we shouldn't get anything like so because we didn't put a query string. So we have no cookie in place, we have no query string in place. Now let's go ahead and add that name. Name equals Billy Bob, we'll hit enter, and now we have both of them. So now if we close out of this entirely and just right-click and view it in the browser, we should just get our cookie response. See that? Because we're not using a query string, but the cookie exists and we're within a minute. So after that minute expires, if we visit this page, once again, we will have no message at top. Alright, so I let over a minute expire. Now if we right-click and view it in the browser, we should not get a message because our cookie expired. Alright, so there's client-side state management using cookies and query strings, and server-side state management using session variables. So really that's just a matter of your website design. If you want to store information on the server or if you want to leave it to be stored on the client's machine, and that's going to all depend on the design of your website and your requirements. But for the most part, it's good to have both options. One other thing I did want to show you regarding state, though, is view state and how you can have some control over it. If we head back over to our world here, and all I did here was go from our source over our design, just to show you can click on controls easier this way, but it's the same thing as clicking on them in here. Alright, so whether you're in design view or you're in the markup view, when you click on them, we get some properties over here. And inside of our property, there is enable view state, which is on by default. And if you turn it off, it'll actually put the line of code in here to turn it off. See that? So enable view state equals false. But generally, for the most part, you can leave this on. Again, it can bloat pages since it's on for everything. So some things that will absolutely never change and are static, you may want to turn it off for if performance is a concern. But generally speaking, view state's a good thing because it saves us a lot of programming code in managing how our page looks between round trips. Alright, now the very last thing I wanted to show you is just that template, the ASP.NET, the new template here based on MVC, the Model View Controller pattern. So let's add our website template in here. I'm going to right click on our solution, choose Add, New Website, and this time we're going to use the ASP.NET website template. And I did mention this was an MVC template before. It's actually not an MVC template. It does not come with Express. That comes with Professional Edition is the MVC template, and it's actually even an add-on. So this is just a basic ASP.NET website with master pages built in, and it kind of gives us the structure of a website with a lot of default stuff in it, like how to create a login form, how to create and more importantly, use master pages. So let me show you how this works. It's actually really neat, and it's not nearly as complicated as MVC anyway, so it's a good place to start here outside of just your basic empty website. So I just called this 14-website 1, and I'm going to hit OK. And here's what it looks like. It gives us a lot of what we're used to here. We've got a scripts folder, a styles folder, and then we've got a bunch of pages in here. The difference here is we have this site.master page, and then we've got an about page, default page, and we've got account pages for managing an account, logging in, registering, changing passwords, so on and so forth. So again, how this works is really neat, because right here we have our default page open up. But what's going to happen here is we've got these content placeholders everywhere. In fact, if we go into our site.master file here, this is kind of the main page. Think of this as your frame. And all of these content pages are going to get piped into a control in this frame called content placeholder. All right, so just to give you an idea, if we run this, I'm just going to say, yep, go ahead, modify it to enable debugging here. It's going to run it, and we should get our welcome page here. So right here is our content control. And anytime we go to a page, see this? These are actually two different pages. Here's the home page, which is default, and here's our about page right up here. And all that's going on here is these pages are getting piped into that content control. So the result here is that you only have to manage your template for your website in one spot, and that's the master page. And that's really handy because now every page you don't have to go and manage that content separately. In fact, over on the right here we also have a login link which pipes in our login page right into here. So it's really neat. And here's also our register page, so you can register and create an account and such. So this is really neat that they give us this template, because it kind of gives you an idea here of how to set up a basic, and beyond even a basic website, because it's got login, creating login forms, registration forms, and then creating your basic forms, and it's all set up for you. So it's just a matter of kind of getting the hang of this. So I definitely advise looking at this template, because you'll learn a lot from it. It's a great starting point to a website. Alright, so in this CBT Nugget, we took a look at web application development. We started off with an overview and just saw how ASP.NET and the web server handle requests and how they kind of work together to make that happen. We then looked at the page lifecycle and saw how pages are constructed all the way to when they're destroyed and unloaded, and everything in between. And really just got a handle on what those events are, because again, if we want to write code for the page, that's the place to do it. Then we looked at state management and saw the difference between client-side state management and server-side state management. And once we got done with our overview there, we jumped into a huge demo, got familiar first with just really how to write ASP.NET code in a web page, and kind of got you familiar here with the anatomy of an ASP.NET page. Saw everything from the processing instructions to how to write inline code, and then of course how to write code in the actual code behind page there. So once we got familiar with that, we started to write a lot of code here. We first worked with some of those page events that we learned about in the overview. Then we got in and wrote some state management there, both on the server using session state and on the client using query strings and cookies. And at the end here, I just wanted to get you familiar with the ASP.NET basic web application template there, which gives us a great starting point to create a full-blown, fully featured ASP.NET website. I hope this has been informative for you, and thank you for viewing.